Hi, aviation operations students. Moving on to week 3, day 1, video 2 on operations management. So let's launch right in. And slideshow. I did want to point out an incorrect statement I made in the history of aviation. While the Enola Gay did drop the first bomb, the one on Hiroshima, the one that really ended the war was the second bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, and that was dropped by the boxcar. So I wanted to make that correction. Today, we're going to start looking at managing, directing, coordinating, and controlling. So looking at managing versus doing, and your styles of problem solving and delegation, and also the styles that work well for you. So there are generally 3 leadership styles. Everyone's a little bit of a mix of the 3, but some are really one or the other. An authoritarian leader just tells you to do it. They don't tell you why. That's it. A therapeutic leader is going to take the time to explain why and everything else. But if they overdo that, that can make it take a little more time than it needs to. And a charismatic leader is the one who's out there, gets you charged up to get going. So what I'd like you to consider is both your leadership style and also how you like to be managed, because early on, you most likely will be working for someone else. If they asked you what type of management style worked well for you, would you be able to tell them? So when we look at delegating, what are the objectives of delegating? First of all, managerial control, being alert to change, adjusting or creating change for yourself, attract and hold competent workers, and know the market. So you have to choose the areas that you can delegate. You want to spend more time being productive and less time putting out fires. Give someone else the authority to put out those fires so you can focus on the things that only you can do as a manager. You want to make sure you give the right person the right job and that you have good communication, because you want to make sure that they understand what they need to do and what their responsibility is. And then they can also let you know what is causing those fires so that you can look and see if there are any systematic changes that need to be made. Selecting the right person for the job, the 80% rule, also known as the Rodwell rule for delegation, and this is important. You want to give each and every task which someone on your staff is 80% ready to handle. And the reason is you want to set them up for success and provide opportunity for growth. Let them gain experience. It's one of the things that you are doing as a student pilot. The more you fly, the more experience you're gaining. And your CFIs are gaining experience for their future careers. So you want to give someone a task they're 80% ready for. Give them the resources and the responsibility to do it. If someone is more than 100% ready to do the task, they're eventually going to get bored of doing those kind of tasks. And again, reserving for yourself only the tasks that you alone can do. So I'd like you to stop and think what that might look like. That doesn't mean if there's no jobs on your radar, then you go help and you do other things. But often there are things that need to be done at a management level that get put on the back burner while the fires are put out. So when you're delegating, set the climate for a comfortable briefing. You want to provide them information and give them a chance to ask questions. Encourage the free flow of information. Share what you know. Make sure it's a dialogue. Focus on the results. Unless the how is the only way, if you've already started to prepare them and they're 80% ready, they should know the how. If there's any part of the how you don't think they know, you might want to help them. So if the how is the only way, then it would be good to have procedures or guidelines in place. Set firm deadlines, both interim and final. It's always good to check and see how something's going instead of waiting until the final deadline, because they may need some help or resources. And so if you wait till the end, it might not happen. And point them towards the necessary resources. Give the task to one person, or if you give it to a team, make sure that someone has the authority and responsibility to make sure it is done right. Offer guidance. Establish a system of control beforehand, and having operating procedures is a very helpful thing to support this. Support your people if they need help or if they're in disputes. It's always been a rule of mine that if there's a problem with a customer, to be the one to step up and let my employees go on with what they're doing while I handle whatever the disputed item is. Follow up along the way, because you do need to know what the issues are that are going on, and give credit to a delegate for a job well done. We can't always pay our employees more for picking up a little more responsibility, but we can recognize them for taking that extra step. So in the decision-making process, planning is important. Setting your goals and objectives as a context for the decision. What direction is your company going in? What decision is going to help take it in that direction? If there are problems or issues, the symptoms point to the cause, but they are not the cause. So look at what the real cause is. Do you have an ad out there that may not be quite provide all the information that needs to? Are some of the employees not trained to do some certain things? You want to find out what the cause is and fix that cause to make sure that that problem does not keep happening again. So that's where collecting and analyzing data comes in. You may give that to someone else, but they need to give you that collected data so you can make a decision, or your management team can make a decision. When you're starting to think about how to attack a problem, you want to develop an array of possible alternatives, including a do-nothing option, because sometimes doing nothing will work. You can do brainstorming, you can do mind mapping. But in that first step, use the rule that all ideas are good at this stage. It doesn't matter how ridiculous it is. If someone says buy a unicorn, put it on the list. You're not throwing anything out in the first step. Now that you have each of your approaches, you can evaluate and weigh the pros and cons of each, or even combine elements into a new step. In the end, when you've done that, you'll select and implement the alternative that works best, that has the least downsides and the most benefits. And then feedback. Once you put it in place, was it the right decision? It may be, it may not, but it's good to follow up on it and check to make sure that it's working the way it is. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can go back to your list, but you need to know that it's working or not working, or that it needs to be adjusted. So one of the things that will be in homework activity for next week will be discussing how you go about making decisions. And I will explain to you what discussion groups are next week. Just keep in mind that I'll be dividing you in groups of 4 or 5 to have some conversations under the discussion subject. So decision-making tools. You need to select employees, everything from hiring them to deciding who you're going to put in charge of a team to who you're going to promote. You also have to think about evaluating them. What are their job requirements, policies? What is your performance appraisal system and forms? And how do you evaluate what they need in training to be able to move forward? How do you compensate your employees? Your job evaluation, your performance appraisal should be part of that. Job surveys, policies, and then you decide how you need to compensate them. And it's going to be based both on your own company and what's happening in the market around you. Disciplining employees. This is always difficult, and we'll be talking about that probably towards the end of March. It really helps to have clear and simple rules, regulations, policies, to have a positive discipline environment. That is, tell people when they did a good job, and if they didn't do a good job, use it as a teaching moment to show them how to do it correctly. Now, if they continue to do it wrong, this is where you bring in your progressive discipline system, usually where you give them a verbal warning, a written warning, and so on. And there needs to be a grievance procedure. If they feel that they have been incorrectly accused of doing something wrong, they need to be able to address that issue. Make sure that you're organizing your work activity, that you have organization charts, manuals, planning goals, calendars, schedules. All of those are important for people to know where they need to be, when they need to be there, and what their responsibilities are when they are there. Financial is important, because if you don't have money, you can't pay your employees, you can't buy materials to go in. So you need to determine profitability. You need to keep track of how many things you're selling, what you sold them for, what it cost you to produce them, and how that lines up with your goals and objectives. If you have that information, you can make adjustments. Do I need to sell more? Do I need to find a cheaper provider? Capital investment, analysis of payback. So am I going to buy an airplane? Am I going to buy a hangar? What are the things that are major investments that I need to consider doing? What is the payback over time? And what are our company investment requirements? Departmental development and control, making sure that each department, not only the organization as a whole, but each department has goals and objectives, a budget, clear authority, and analyze their activity to see how they're matching up against the goals and activity or goals and objectives that you set for them. Cash requirements, making sure that you have a cash budget, that you have a policy, and potentially a short-term loan source, because sometimes when you have big contracts, you aren't paid until the end of them, but you need to keep them paying your employees in the meantime. And so you can get short-term payday loans that actually, for businesses, that actually bridge them to when they get paid for their when you get paid for the contracts. Accounts receivable, who owes you money? Those are things you need to think about. Credit policies, credit applications, account aging process. What are you going to do when the debt's 1, 2, 3 or more months old? Collection procedure, how far are you going to pursue it? And at what point do you decide it's not worth it? Or if it's a large amount, do you consider litigation to collect the money? Material and resources, your supplies on hand, your inventory system, your information system. How do you know if you're running low on something and it needs to be reordered? How does that line up with your goals and objectives? And your policy on supplies on hand. Some businesses work in a just-in-time, that is, the supplies come in like the day before they're needed. Some others order weekly or monthly and stockpile for the rest of the time. You have to look at what fits your business. Pricing material, what is your pricing policy, your pricing guidelines and procedures? And don't forget that paying for materials also includes the cost of the people that go with them, the business building that it's in, insurance and everything else. And look at where you're going to make your profit. So a lot of restaurants don't charge a huge deal for meals. They charge generally a little over the cost of the meals. They're making their profit off of beverages and especially the alcoholic beverages. So there has to be some place that you're building profit into your business, that it's more than what it costs you to make it. And then maintaining your physical assets. If you have an aircraft, if you have a building, if you have space, if you have an apron that you use, you want to make sure that you keep it clean and in good condition. So what is your maintenance policy? What is your preventative maintenance procedure? You want to take care of what you already have. And with aircraft, you also have maintenance issues that are required by law. So you need to make sure you're staying on top of those. So you don't have a plane that has to go out of service because you didn't do the maintenance that was required. So things to think about is particular to aviation operations, your marketing activity level. Again, what are your company goals and objectives? What's your economic situation? How much can you afford to pay? What are your product requirements? Are you going to do promotion from within your company? Are you going to hire an outside firm to help you? Are you going to use some kind of tracking system like Salesforce that lets you know who you've reached out to, what stage they are, if any, in discussions? Flight activity guidelines. You need to have operating procedure manuals, pilot training and flight standards, a clear line of authority. Every time you are getting into a plane at Summit Aviation, you should know what's expected of you. Your instructor should know what's expected of them. And if there is an incident, they should know exactly what needs to be done to rectify it. Maintenance quality control. Again, your policy, guidelines, and procedures, your inspection checklists, your inspector personnel, and then you're also going to have a calendar, especially when you're looking at things like aircraft or aircraft equipment that needs to be maintained. Fuel contamination, that's something you should be checking for every time you get in an airplane to fly it. You should have a policy, rules, procedures, fuel sampling, clear markings, training, and authority. And if the fuel appears to be contaminated, you have to have a procedure on what happens next. And safety. Really, in aviation operations, that is the ultimate issue, because if you have a major incident with your company, most likely your company is not going to be able to survive it. And I think that people thought Boeing was too big to fail, but we've seen what's happened with the 737-08s. So you need to have a policy statement, rules, regulations, and procedures, reinforcement and recognition, like Dave's gone 100 days without an injury, involvement of everyone, and have safety personnel who are monitoring safety, who incidents are reported to, and they also learn the lessons from the incident, and they wrap that back into your rules, regulations, and procedures and communicate it as needed. So at Summit Aviation, I believe it's every Friday, they have a staff meeting, and if there's any changes to any of the procedures because of something they've learned, then that will be disseminated to everybody there. Also with the FAA, you have all sorts of regulations and things that may change that as well. So just think about what other kind of decision-making tools and resources you might have, or things you think about the tools up above. Now we'll move on to the topic of time management. Time management is critical because generally there's two things you never have enough of, that's time and money. And you need to work around Parkinson's first law that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. So if someone is doing the same job every day and it's really boring and there's not a lot of work, they will drag it out to take the full 8 hours. But at the same time, you don't want to go in the other direction and overload employees so that they feel like they're being taken advantage of and don't enjoy the work. Procrastination is a big one. I do it myself when I have a major paper due. My house is never so clean as when I have a major paper due. Telephone, email, visitors, and other interruptions. As a manager, you may sometimes want to have someone who's a gatekeeper, or just turn your phone off for an hour, maybe an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, so you can get things done without interruptions, and then you can turn around and follow up on those phone calls and messages that you received. Failure to get back on task promptly. I was in a workplace where about 9:30, everybody gathered around the coffee pot and the water cooler, and they chatted, and they just did not get back to the work. Sometimes an hour was wasted. It's fine to take a break, but people then found it very difficult to get back into the swing of their work. Meetings, we're going to talk about that separately because meetings that are not productive are a huge time suck. Reports that don't have a purpose. So one of the things that happens is we create reports to help track what's going on in the company. Sometimes something's changed and that report really isn't needed, but nobody has told the person who's making the report that it's not needed anymore. So always look and make sure that the reports you are getting have a purpose. And if they don't, or if they've been replaced by another report, or perhaps you're no longer using that material, then eliminate that report because you're wasting their time and yours. And lack of or poor delegation. Not giving the tasks out appropriately or keeping all the work to yourself so that you are busy and your people are bored. So again, I've put these together in one list for you to think about time management problems and the kinds of things that you need to think about that impact your time, not just in a business, but also in the school setting. Failure to make decisions on incoming items. So if you get a homework assignment, do you make sure you know when it's due and when you're going to do it? If you get all caught up with operational crises, focusing on those fires or focusing on one assignment and not your other assignments. Interruptions without warnings, we get a lot of those. It's hard sometimes to get back on work. Delays, such as not having the tools I need to, delayed the videos for last week. And too much reading and research that's not focused on the direction you need to go. As a graduate student myself, I know that sometimes you go down a rabbit hole. You're doing research and then something looks really interesting, maybe tangentially related to what you're doing, and you start researching that. You need to remember what the focus is of what you're researching. And then lack of priorities. It is very important to prioritize and make sure that you have a list of things that have to be done right away and things that can wait. And that you also pass that information to your employees if you give them multiple tasks to do. So some time management strategies. Have a plan for each day. Some use planning notebooks, to-do list. I'm one that has a sticky note. So at the end of every day, I write down my fixed appointments and I write down 2 or 3 high priority items. And then I stick that on the bottom of my screen. And as my day goes by, I know that I have to focus on those. I have other things I can do on my to-do list, but those are the things that absolutely have to be done that day. Organize your papers, your emails for future dates and projects. Create file folders on your computer, in your email to put them in. So as they come in, they're there when you have time to get back to them. I do that with my research project. Sort tasks by priority and deadline. Develop specific goals. It could be with a supervisor or based on your company goals. List tasks that relate to the goals, map out the dates, put on schedule or a to-do list. And you can also do that with your homework, that knowing that you have to do your reading before you view the videos, before you do your homework. Have a place to track ideas, things to remember. I have a notebook that I keep where I can jot down notes when they come into my mind, so I have them for later. Eliminate distractions when possible. You can set office hours or hours that your door is open, specific times not to be interrupted. Because I work from home, my family knows that if my office door is shut, that pretty much unless the house is burning down, I'm not to be interrupted. Set time limits for meetings and stick to them. And I try and do that with office hours or anything else I have. I set generally a 1 hour time, and we will be done earlier if necessary, or we'll stop at that hour. Use email or phone when possible, and that's certainly true nowadays. Face-to-face is important, and I think that's one of the things I miss the most, is not being able to meet my students, not be able to meet with my friends and my mentors face-to-face. But when you can email or phone, use the internet, you save that travel time as well. Keep a list of messages, calls, and emails that need to be returned, and make sure to set aside time to do so. I know some people who have lists of calls or emails that need to be returned that are 3 or 4 weeks backdated. That's not a good practice. People expect to hear from you, and so you need to get back to them in a reasonable amount of time. So make sure if you create a list that you do set aside time to get that done. You probably don't want them to get over a week old. Set a time to get small, low priority tasks off your list. Sometimes you can pick an hour at the end of the day or the beginning of the day or after lunch. And there's small things, but they don't take very long, and you can get them done and get them off your list. Manage by wandering around. Encourage staff, see potential problems before they develop. And I know that when my husband went to work from home, he is in the computer program managing arena. That was the hardest thing for him because he was very used to manage by wandering around. So now he has one of his 4 monitors, has a chat in there, and he checks with his employees periodically, sees how they're doing, do they need anything? And so he does the management by walking around, but he does it by using instant messaging instead. Respect others' time. Don't interrupt. Don't, try and keep meetings and talks brief. And if you need to go in and talk to somebody, let them know exactly how much time. Hey, I need 5 minutes of your time. I need 15 minutes of your time. Whoops. Stick to one task if possible, or set aside solid blocks of time each day or week to work on tasks until completed. Set good stopping points, track where you left off, and don't work on one task so long that you get bored with it. I don't ever have an issue of it because being both a graduate student and an instructor and having 2 other jobs, I don't get a chance to be bored. But I also stay with this studying. Don't try and sit down and do all the weather activities for the whole week in one day. Take a break between videos, between reading and assignments. Give yourself time to process it before you move on. And understand a clear knowledge of authority and discretion for you and for your employees, so they don't need to interrupt you to ask questions about things that they should be able to take care of themselves. Use a checklist. Set up red flags, a way for people to ask for help. Use deadlines in a positive way to generate excitement. Maybe we need to be to the halfway point by March 15th. And so that gives them a checkpoint. Oh, we're doing great, good job. Or yeah, we need to speed up a little bit. So creating some artificial guidelines, or creating a deadline that's a little early so that you have time to fix it if there's an issue. Coordinate and aggregate errands. So if you are going to, for example, if I'm going to run to campus, I'm probably going to stop and drop something off in the sub. I'm going to drop something off at the education department and also at Gallatin College, so I can get all those things done at one time. I'm not going to take a separate trip for each of those. I'm going to combine those in a trip. If you live out in the country, that's another thing you're used to. You go to town once a week and you run all those errands when you go into town. Delegate and also create a system to report back. Set goals with checkup dates. Again, letting people know the direction they're working in, giving them some kind of guideline on what they need to be doing and when, and a way for them to report back to you. That might be filling in something online at the end of their workday. It might be something like a system that lets you know how they're doing on their sales, where they're putting it in as they go. Or it might be a weekly report. Hey, here's the projects I'm working on. These are the ones I got done this week. These are the ones that'll carry over into next week. Create a standard operating procedures manual, and we see that in aviation. We have a flight operations, ground operations, and others as well, to make sure people know what to do, who to go to when, and how to document things. Report regularly so people know what you're accomplishing. Divide large projects into small pieces. So if I'm going to write a paper for my class, I'm going to read through what they want me to read through before I decide. I'm going to pick a topic and I'm going to start researching it. And I'm also going to set myself a deadline, because I've researched topics only to find out there's not as much information as you might hope that's available. And then I need to change topics. So I need to give myself time. Then I actually do the research I need to do. I set myself a goal of, say, I want 8 papers that I can cite for my paper that I'm going to write. And then I'm going to start. And during that process, I'm gathering information. Now I'm going to organize it into a paper. I'm going to check it against the length I need. If it's too long, what am I going to cut out? If it's too short, what else do I need to research to fill in the gaps, and what are those gaps? When I get done, I need to make sure it is properly formatted, that all the citations are in the appropriate format, and that it gets uploaded on time. One thing I ask you to check is when you've submitted an assignment, make sure that you get a confirmation email, because sometimes you submit your assignment and it doesn't actually upload properly. If that happens, you won't get an email. And sometimes it doesn't, and it generates an email, but you can send me that email to show that you did upload it in time. So I'm going to ask you to think about kinds of strategies you use in a work environment, errands around the house, or you use for school. So contemplate your own time management strategies. As I said, the biggest time suck is meetings. An important thing is figure out who really needs to be in the room. If information from them is needed to make a decision, then they should be there. Don't invite people who don't need to be there. Prepare a specific written agenda and set a time limit either on the items or on the meeting. Prepare and send out handouts, information in advance. Is there information they need to know? Make sure they have the agenda and everything else. And also make sure you read anything referring to the meeting before you go to the meeting. Start on time. And I know in Montana that seems to be difficult. Have someone take minutes and end on time. And usually within a day, distribute those minutes. So if someone else is writing them up and you're the one leading them, make sure they get them to you to look over before they send them out. Stay on topic. Really important one, take action on every item. So every item that comes up, make a decision. The decision may be we don't have enough information. So then you're going to specifically task someone to go get that information. But whatever you do, every item should have some kind of action taken, and someone should be responsible for that item, and that information should be in the minutes. And if you're voting, make sure you have established protocols. Robert's rules are an example, but they are not required in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to ask you to think about, now that we've discussed all these different kinds of management, meeting management, what practices do you like best to keep meetings or classes on track? So homework number 2 is going to be about management errors. So you're going to go back to the list in slide 18 from presentation, the first presentation for day 1. And you're going to look at the common management errors. And you're going to look at them and consider a standard operating procedure, a rule, or expectations that you could have for your business, much like the ones that we developed for the course, that might protect from some of these common mistakes. You want to make sure those rules are simple and clear. So the first part of the assignment is to list 3 management errors, and below each one, a standard operating procedure guideline or something that would help you and your staff avoid those errors. And it doesn't have to be for a specific business. It can be for the business idea that you have, or it can just be a general idea. And then by Sunday, I would like you to post a response to at least 3 other posts. You can select 1 or more of their standard operating procedures and make a response, but you do have to respond to 3 other people. Comment on whether you think the procedure will help prevent the error, or if you don't think it will, a suggestion on how the procedure could be improved. I'm also asking you to use constructive criticism. Don't be really negative about the work they did. So definitions.net defines constructive criticism as offering valid and well-reasoned opinions about the work of others, usually involving both positive and negative comments, in a friendly manner rather than an oppositional one. I know in the weather class, when we had the case studies, you guys did a really good job with that and feedback on the presentations. And so I'd like to see that standard continue for this semester. So that is the end of the presentations for day one and the second presentation for day one. Next up for day two and week 3 will be business ethics. Thank you very much for your time. And day 2 is probably going to be posted by Tuesday because of the technical issues. Things are running a little bit behind. Thank you for your time and attention. And if you have any questions, as always, be sure to reach out to me.